You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts of the show. So, unfortunately, we couldn't be live with you guys on Friday because, unfortunately, we were both down sick. But we did do a pre-record, which we're actually doing right now, of our review of The Bad Batch Season 2, Episode 4. So, without any further ado, especially because we're pre-recording this moments before we go live on Monday night, which, of course, you guys will probably see this show on Tuesday, we could get right into this thing. So this episode was kind of a nice callback to me to not just the Phantom Menace, where, of course, we return to pod racing is the basic premise of the show, but also, they introduced a few new things to it, like now they got Riot Racing, which is pretty much pod racing with no rules. And it even had some callback. I mean, there was a couple of things in Attack of the Clones, and it even had somewhat of the same look to me as Resistance in a way. There was a lot of callbacks to that too. So, I mean, overall, I have to say I enjoyed the episode. I think some people might look at this as a filler episode, but actually, I really wouldn't put it in that category because you do see a lot of character development from everybody from Sid to the clones that we feature in this episode. Some of the lore moves forward. So, yeah, I mean, overall, I thought it was good, and that there are some definite things that we can unpack in this one.
Yeah, I mean, I would consider it a filler, at least for me. I don't think it, in a way, really moved the story along. I mean, outside of the fact that, we got a chance to see that Tech kind of took the mantle of being the hero in this.
Yeah, that was a big one.
But other than that, though, I mean, it did have a lot of different callbacks to Phantom Menace. It definitely had that vibe where, we got a big race is kind of the center of it all, and they're on, a Tatooine or whatever, like planet. So it's kind of, it definitely had those vibes again, which was familiar, which was cool. But I felt like this episode was a bit of a waste, in the sense of, I don't feel like it really moved our characters forward too much. Like I said, outside of Tech being who he was, and the fact that we got the chance to see them care about Sid. I think that was kind of a cool thing in the twist where you kind of see that.
Well, and it's not just that, but I mean, even Sid herself, before she was basically just almost a set piece as a narrative, just moving forward, here's your latest mission, go on. Now you actually see her on a mission. You see a little bit more growth. Again, it's more world building. To me, a filler is kind of like the Spider Egg episode of Season 2 of The Mandalorian, to where, they're really, I mean, other than the fact, even that one, I guess you can make the argument, it's really the first of a 3-story arc where, he ends up meeting the other Mandalorians. But there's a lot of things in this where, I mean, there's a lot of episodes that you even wouldn't consider filler that you could say, well, you could do without it. Because, I mean, if you really think about it, at its core, this series is about Clone Force 99 and, what they eventually find themselves in. But I like the point that you made, though, where, we do see Tech as a hero, which we don't normally see. And again, that's a big step forward. What's the name of that droid? This guy, the little pilot dude that
What was it? It's like Tails or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah, I mean, I thought, because he was one of the ones, and I thought that the comic relief in this episode was actually funny. Like a lot of the Star Wars stuff that they do, depending on how good they are with writing the humor, a lot of times it's either a little bit too on the nose or maybe it's kind of silly or whatever. But this I thought actually resembled some of the best of the Star Wars humor, where you actually had this droid who basically just looked at these guys like, you guys are gonna fly this thing. I think you need to. And of course, he gets instantly destroyed, and then they're trying to put him together, and he's yelling at him about that. I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah, it was almost like a cocky 3PO. That's what it kind of reminded me of.
Exactly.
Like, you had an arrogant, cocky 3PO. I mean, this is what it would sound like, And so, yeah, I agree with you on that. Like, that was funny. And I really honestly enjoyed, um, he was kind of like the villain, but the big, huge guy,
Well, now that he was actually voiced by Ernie Hudson, and I thought that was really cool. I recognized that voice instantly, and I had to go back and double check, like, is that Ernie? And it was. And he was that was another example of why I wouldn't necessarily consider this filler, because he was kind of ominous. I mean, he really did represent a threat to the clones and, certainly to Sid.
Well, it definitely made you wonder, like, what was their relationship? Because it seemed a little. I mean, definitely, it seemed personal, but you don't know, like, how personal. It kind of gave like they were in a relationship, or they were dating, or
yeah, I know, I got that,
best friends or something. Like
I caught that
had
too.
That kind of vibe to it. I'm like, all right, what's up with Sid? And it kind of makes you wonder about her. So in the world building aspect with her, yeah, I could kind of expanding her a little bit.
Yeah, it expands her, and it gives us a little bit more of a glimpse into, other stuff that's going on during this time. Because another thing, I mean, it's nice to see, you had up until now, up until this episode, actually, you had a very deep separation of the things that would go on during the prequel era and then what happens during the original trilogy, right? So you had, in the original trilogy, things seemed a little bit more bleak. It was a little bit more war-torn. I mean, even though in the prequel trilogy you have an absolute all-out war with the Clone Wars, you still had, especially prior to Attack of the Clones, you had your things like all the pod racing and all the sabacc tournaments and things like that. I mean, there's a lot of, pageantry and glitz and glamour and things that were going on during that time period that are noticeably absent from the original trilogy era. So it was kind of nice to see that at some point they're actually connecting the prequels and the original trilogy, because even though this is still taking place a little bit closer to the prequel era, because the Empire has just gotten into power. I forgot how much time we said. We did figure out, or somebody that had chatted with us figured out how much time passed between season 1 and season 2. I think it was like 4 months or something, I want to say, between the Bad Batch seasons.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I can see the roughly been about 4 months.
Because I remember one of the things that we were looking at was the change in character of Omega, but, and then we pointed out, well,
like 6, yeah.
It's kind of like, well, I mean, she's definitely more mature and more useful and less kid-like. But there's almost that trap of actually making it seem like a lot more time has passed, because, she's acting so much better, and she's drawn a little differently too, that she seems a little older than she actually is. And that, I remember, was something that led to the discussion in the chats in one of our earlier reviews in this season 2, where I thought initially that maybe like a year had passed or something, but it really wasn't quite that long.
No, it wasn't. Yeah, it's only about 6 months, and that's the thing, is we really didn't hear much from Omega like that. I mean, outside of the fact that she was really pushing for, to help Sid, okay, but then once that happened, it was just kind of like on tech, really, for the most part, and it was kind of, Record didn't even say as much. It was kind of more so, like I said, just on.
Well, it's like you said, it was a very tech-centric episode, which is very unusual. I mean, even Wrecker, Wrecker, of course, provided his usual comic relief. But one thing that I thought was really interesting about this particular situation that they were in is that usually Wrecker's like the big guy that's going to get everybody out of the situation. It's like there's very few people. I mean, a lot of times if they overwhelm those guys, they overwhelm in numbers, but they can't necessarily overwhelm in strength. But when you look at the guy that Ernie Hudson voiced, he made Wrecker look like Omega.
I know, man. He was huge.
He
kind of reminded me of Thanos almost in a way.
Exactly.
Man.
Yeah, right. And I mean, I think that in a lot of ways, it's really unique to see them physically threaten that way, because not only did you have him, but you had his henchmen who were equally as capable. So suddenly Wrecker wasn't that be-all, end-all, oh, well, we'll just leave it to him because he'll just, no pun intended, but start wrecking shop. Exactly. It's kind of like a situation maybe in the original trilogy where if, you couldn't rely on Chewbacca's strength. It's like, uh-oh, I guess we're in trouble, basically. And so I really appreciated that,
Yeah, definitely. I love that, it kind of, because Tech was kind of the one who was apprehensive about it all anyway. But then he ended up having to be the one like, okay, his skill set, allowed him to truly shine because he was able to look at the diagnostics of everything. It was like, okay, he's calculating things, he's figuring things out. And Little Tails here was kind of like, well, who's going to make these split decisions? He kind of had that. He kind of had that Han Solo vibe in A New Hope. He's like, "Who's going to fly, kid? You?" He's like, "Well, you bet I could. I'm not such a bad pilot myself." Like that's kind of like the attitude, kind of Tails had. And to see, Tech is like, okay, you know what? I'll step in. I'll do what I need to do, and he kind of figured it out and made it work. And even though there's times where they were looking at him like, man, you sure you got this? And he's like, yeah, I'm fine. He was still confident in himself, and he wasn't necessarily snarky about it. It was just that confidence in his ability, which I really loved.
Yes.
And then even at the end of it all, for him to finally like kind of step into the limelight, you got this whole arena like chanting his name. He's kind of looking around like, oh, so this is what this feels like, because you kind of used to get that from Hunter and Wrecker, and Crosshair doesn't really so much care about the limelight like that. He just wants to complete the mission. So for Tech to kind of, even when they announced his name, he was like, Tech? Anybody heard of this guy? I mean, that, like you said, the levity in this was, spot on.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of
for it.
And it's funny because had we actually done the show live on Friday, being that I had just seen the episode, I think I actually did watch this one on Wednesday. No, I watched it on Thursday. I watched it Thursday night. And I probably should have rewatched it, actually, because there was a lot of things that I remember, I mean, when we were doing the Andor reviews, I would just, I took like all these notes and everything else. But a lot of the reasons why I did that, especially with Andor, was because there was just so much depth and, so many layers. And I mean, there's no way even a day that you're going to, I mean, unless you watch the episode right before, you're not necessarily going to have that same impact. And I really wanted to have the impact. These shows, they're only like 20 minutes long. Some of them, like the last one, the Solitary Clone episode, there was a lot of depth. There were a lot of things going on. Even when we did Tales of the Jedi, right? I mean, those were only like 15 minutes in some cases, but there was, especially with the Dooku storylines, there's a lot going on.
A lot of meat on the bone, right?
Right. But and with this one, I mean, it's like there is, but you have to look a little bit harder for it, and you have to, because I could see where people would look at this episode and just, even if they didn't decry it as a filler episode right away, you might think that it's just kind of a surface level thing, because even the last episode, even the Clones one, You know, the whole solitary clone, when you really stop and think about it, and this is not a criticism at all, I actually enjoy this about this season. The episodes have a very linear, kind of flat storyline. You know, they're not trying to do too much, because I think that that's one of the problems that the Clone Wars in particular suffered from. Rebels did to a degree at times too, where they were trying to put too much into these 20-minute episodes. You know, where this one, the last few of these actually have just been, you know, real surface. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on underneath it, obviously, but I'm just saying that if you just take it for what it is, right? It's a, you know, I mean, they basically, their friend's in trouble. They got to win a pod race in order to save her. You know, I mean, really, when you break it down, that's pretty much what you're looking at. You know, that's what this thing is about.
Yeah, I think, you know, you're right. I mean, in that regard, yeah, it's very flat. Some episodes, I guess, have a little bit more meat to them, or there's more weight, I guess, invested into it, and you might learn, or you know, learn some more things that you might not have once thought about. You know, so to that point, you know, it's kind of cool in that way where you can kind of just throw a show out there. It was just like, okay, this was fun. This was just a nice adventure type situation. But um but I guess when you coming off, and I mean it's bound to happen. You know, you was it 16 episodes for this show, and
Yeah,
you
but
know,
again,
this is only
I'm not saying that this didn't have depth. See, I'm arguing the story by itself is just a very surface level thing, but there's actually a lot going on in this thing. I mean, really, when you stop and think about it, even with tech, right? Once again, you're confronted with the themes of technology versus skill. You know, this is the whole
Mhm.
thing behind the clones, even with the stormtroopers. It's the same thing when Palpatine decided against using battle droids and then created the clones because he needed people to think on their feet. The same thing with
Mhm.
Tails, you know, versus, you know, he's sitting there thinking that, look, you know, I'm the guy that needs to pilot this because I'm a droid. I can make these calculations. I can do all this stuff. But yet, he couldn't actually overcome the strategy of, you know, the other guy that was piloting for Ernie Hudson's character. I wish I can remember the guy's name. So, and of course, you have a lot on the line in this episode. I mean, it's really easy to just go, oh, yeah, okay, friend's in trouble, got to win a pod race, rescue friend. But there are so many implications of what will happen if they don't win this race. I mean, for this time period and for what they're dealing with, it's almost as important as the whole Anakin Skywalker thing, you know? Wins the race, gets his freedom, on and on it
Yeah, I
goes.
mean, I don't know. Uh I want to believe that, but I don't know, because it's it seems like, okay, if the grand scheme of it all, like, okay, let's just say Tech for whatever reason lost the race. It's like, okay, it really doesn't affect the Bad Batch too much. I mean, yeah, she's kind of a quasi friend of theirs or whatever, but in the overarching story of it all, like, at least unless unless we find out later on that Sid has a more prominent purpose.
Well,
I
she
mean, we
has a
lose Sid, we
prominent
lose.
role. I mean, number one, she knows about them. So that's already kind of a dangerous thing in a way, because don't forget, she's offering them protection and she's also offering them money. I mean, the last season, the first season, I mean, she was everything. Without her, they would have been either captured, killed, lost, whatever. She was the main source of protection. She's also steeped more and more, as we find out, into the rebellion, and she's the one that's actually more or less keeping the train rolling. I mean, the Bad Batch is in serious trouble if they lose Sid. Now, I have no doubt that eventually, and of course, there's about 3 or 4 different ways that they could do this. One, they could just have the Bad Batch directly join the rebellion at some point. But even if they don't go that route, they could, and they're already starting to get to this point to where they can begin to maybe get money sources and things like that, on their own. But I mean, that's one of the reasons why a couple episodes ago they had to risk everything in order to get that, to raid the Dooku's castle, because they needed more funds. And Sid's like, okay, listen, you guys earned enough money to pay me off, but you still don't have nearly enough to even basically survive or do. I mean, what are you going to do? You're wanted by the Empire. How are you going to? That was the reason why Sid was such a lifeline to them. Because what are they going to do?
Well, I mean, to be honest, though, okay. If they buy their free, because I mean, the only reason why she kind of has a hold on them, more or less, more so out of manipulation, because she's giving them the impression that the Empire is looking for them, and they're really not.
Well, maybe that was true.
As long as they're not screwing up the Empire's stuff, the Empire doesn't care. As long as you're not bothering what they're trying to do. Clone Force 99, I mean, as long as Clone Force 99 is not interfering in Imperial business, the Empire doesn't really so much care about Clone Force 99, because it's like,
they don't necessarily
we've got bigger
know,
fish
though.
to fry.
Well, there's two things you got to look at. Number one, if they pop their heads up trying to make it, former clones, they can't afford to really let that. I mean, all these clones that have gone and defected and all that stuff, they're wanted. In Clone Force 99, I mean, it wasn't like they were just dismissed from duty. They had, they had attacked. I mean, they might not necessarily be the highest priority targets, but don't forget Crosshair is after them now. He's got a thing, basically. So, I mean, if Crosshair were still with them, they might be able to go underground. But, I mean, that was one of the whole reasons why they got mixed up with Sid in the first place, was because they didn't have any money sources. They couldn't go out and do anything, really, because then they would get put on the Empire's radar. I mean, they're off the Empire's radar because they're just doing some things covertly with Sid. And so nobody's really finding out about them.
But what do they really need money for, though?
Survival. I mean,
like, they could...
They don't have a pension plan with the Empire.
I guess what I'm saying is just like, okay, they could go to kind of like what Ahsoka did, like, okay, go live off the land or something.
Or like Obi-Wan and be a space butcher.
Yeah, exactly. Like, just go get, one of those regular little jobs or something like that, and just, like, that's what I'm saying. You don't need to do what you're doing in order to survive. They're doing this because this is what I get it, this is what they kind of know to do or know how to do very well. So they want to keep doing it, but it's like, it's
I don't know,
nothing
though,
for
because
them to go do that, though.
Now that they have Omega, because don't forget, Omega is really wanted, and their mission kind of changed. That was probably an option for them. But ever since that they essentially kidnapped Omega from the facility and everything else, and she's definitely wanted by the Empire. Now, they could find a way to... But there's always going to be bounty hunters. There's always going to be somebody after her. So if they decide to bail on her, well, then, yeah, then they can go off and do whatever it is they want to do. But as long as they have decided, hey, we're going to protect her, well, they need resources for that. They need to be able to hide somewhere. They need some sort of a system. That's why I'm really curious on where this whole thing is going to go. Because I'm wondering, are they going to... Well, first of all, it would really be nice to know how many seasons this show is supposed to go. But even if you look at it within the 16-episode thing, it's like, well, are they gonna tie up the Omega storyline, or are they going to tie up the Crosshair storyline? There's a lot of uncertainty, really.
Yeah, I mean, that is very true. I don't really know where they're going to go with this. I mean, I think Omega has the ultimate... or a bigger purpose this season that we have yet to, uncover. And maybe,
Mm,
like I said, we're only 3 episodes in, so
or
maybe by episodes, well, yeah, 4, but maybe by episode like 8 or 9, or something like that. It's like, okay, I see where they're going with this now. So
yeah, I mean, there's that, and there's that's the other reason why it's you never really know. I mean, with some of these episodes, you don't know. Are they establishing something? Is this part of like a 4-story arc, or
hmm
are they? What are they doing? Are they establishing a villainous character that they're going to eventually bring out in like episode 12? I mean, you really don't know what's going on, and that's why part of it is you just have to take these episodes, especially when we're reviewing them from week to week. That's why I'm glad that we end up, when we do the last episode of the show, for instance, right? We'll do the season finale, episode
hmm
16, or maybe if they do like 15, 16 together, or whatever it is. When the last episode hits, there will be one more episode of our show, because what we end up doing, kind of like what we did with Andor, I think, is we did like a season wrap up. Because now that you know the whole story and you know everything in context, now you
hmm
can go review the season.
yeah,
But
and
for
say like,
now,
yeah, hmm
but for now, I mean, we're just at all you could do is really go, okay. I mean, we're a few episodes in now, right? I mean, it's different when you're doing episodes 1 or 1 and 2. Okay, now it's 4. We could see where this fits in the context of the other episodes. But as you pointed out, we're only 25% into this thing. You can't really, we really don't know what the season is going to be about, and, we even said this about Rebels, right? Even when you're halfway through a season, you have a little bit of a feel, but remember when they used to do those mid-season breaks with those, and they would show you the
Oh
trailer, what was
yeah,
coming up? And we were
yeah.
sitting there going, whoa, they got really? Because you think you had the season figured out, and then you see the trailer for the second half, and you're like, dude. I never saw this coming. I don't know. What's
How I
that all
feel right
about?
now.
Yeah, I mean,
Exactly.
and so that just goes to show you, though, that even when you're halfway through, you really don't know. And one of the things that Filoni in particular is really good at doing is once you get to the last 2, 3, 4 episodes, then you start to really understand the gravity of what came before. And you might start taking a second look at like, oh yeah, I remember, on the 6th episode or whatever, this happened, and I kind of dismissed it, but now it's this big thing. So it's going to
hmm
be really interesting to see how that fits. But yeah, I mean, I would be inclined to agree that, I mean, if you just sort of take this episode kind of at its, at face value, and maybe not necessarily put the weight of the entire season into it, you
hmm
can go, it was a really fun, humorous adventure story that did some world building and, furthered the character storylines, maybe gave them a little bit more depth. Kind of like you said, the fact that this is the first time where they treat Sid more like a colleague or a friend versus just a source of jobs and money and all this other stuff.
hmm
I think that could actually have some implications later in the season. We'll have to see.
So, what would you rate it? This
Mm,
particular episode?
oh, probably. mm, I'm gonna go back and forth between like a 7.5 to an 8 because
Okay.
it's good. It's fun. It's a good adventure thing, which of course is something that Star Wars needs to be. Not everything needs to be, ooh, look, Thrawn revealed, or, oh, look, now there's a goldenrod lightsaber, and oh, look, Qui-Gon's Force Ghost is, not every episode has to be
hmm
that. Sometimes you could just be exactly what George Lucas intended it to be. Even though I do, like I said, I think that there's enough meat on the bone that you can give it some weight, but at the same time, I usually try to reserve my 9s and 10s and things like that for just, absolutely outstanding episodes, you know, and this is a really good episode. So yeah, I'll stick with 7.5.
Okay. I think I'm going to give this a
You go, I think I'm going to give it a 10.
6. I'm going to give it a 6. You know, for those reasons that you just named, like it was fun, it was cool. You know, it didn't really move me. It didn't really, you know, I didn't get much out of it, but it was like, okay, this is cool to see Tech kind of get his time in the his time to shine, and you know, the cool little race scenes and stuff like that. But
Well,
I
I
mean,
will
I could live with or without it, so
and
I'll give it a 6.
that's what I was going to say, is that even though I didn't really see it as a filler episode, and I get all that, I do agree that, I mean, if you remove this, other than they would, if they really want to develop something between the clones and Sid, you know, and they want to deepen that relationship a little bit, they would have to put that in another episode, because they chose to do it beginning here. But yeah, I mean, you could take this out, and it may, I mean, we don't know though. You know, maybe some key things happen here that we don't, you know, like, man, I wish I could remember the guys. You know, I could just look it up, but that would be too much. That would be too much work right now. But Ernie Hudson's character, if they're actually introducing him to be somebody a little bit more prominent, you know, down the line, that'll be interesting. I'm curious about that. But yeah, I mean, you know, it was good. It's not gonna knock, you know, anybody, you know, for a loop and everything else. But I am curious now on what they're going to actually do for the next episode, which will actually premiere tomorrow. So Friday we will actually be live. That is the plan. And you guys are going to want to check that out as we review the 5th episode. Because as we always say, it doesn't matter what we think, it matters what you guys think. So let us know in the comments section, because unfortunately, we're able to be live with you guys. Let us know in the comments section what you thought of this episode. Did you think it was filler and, you know, maybe you could do without it? Did you think it actually had a little bit more weight to that? What were your thoughts on this episode? Let us know in the comments section. So yeah, Bad Batch. We're a little bit over a quarter of the way through now. So, you know, we'll have to see what episode 5 has in store for us. And then, of course, as you saw, you know, last night we reviewed the Phantom Menace. We did the whole Phantom Menace in-depth analysis. So you guys, if you missed it, you're going to want to check that out. And then, of course, Friday, you know, we're going to be reviewing episode 5 of The Bad Batch. Next Monday, it'll be our in-depth analysis of Attack of the Clones as we work our way through the prequels. So you're going to want to definitely check that out. And we're usually live every Friday and every Monday at 8 o'clock. So, again, check it out. If you didn't hit the like button, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you on our next show. So with that, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.